1 month ago, he said he would not rule out force. He called Greenland an absolute necessity. He framed ownership as strategic destiny. He revived the language of purchase, of annexation, of inevitability. Today, Greenland signed a defense pact with Canada and Denmark, and the United States was not in the room. The agreement was signed on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference. For signatures, Canada, Denmark, Greenland, the Faroe Islands, joint Arctic surveillance, coordinated military planning, intelligence integration, logistics support, defense innovation cooperation. No American pen touched the document. This was not symbolic diplomacy, this was structural realignment. Trump believed pressure would bring Greenland closer. Instead, it pushed Greenland sideways toward Ottawa. The Arctic is not a frozen afterthought, it is the next geopolitical frontier. Melting sea ice is not only an environmental story, it is a shipping story, an energy story, a military story. The Northwest Passage is becoming navigable for longer periods each year. That route can cut days off shipping between Asia and Europe. Fewer days at sea means lower fuel costs, lower insurance premiums, faster delivery. Billions in potential savings over time. Greenland sits at the entrance. Control over Arctic transit corridors means influence over emerging global trade arteries. Ports, search and rescue infrastructure, surveillance networks, these determine who shapes the rules. Then there are resources. Greenland contains significant deposits of rare earth elements, lithium, nickel, cobalt, strategic minerals that power electric vehicles, renewable grids, advanced weapon systems, semiconductors. Supply chains for the 21st century run through these materials. China currently dominates rare earth processing. Western governments are scrambling to diversify. Greenland represents one of the few untapped reserves large enough to matter. Offshore, hydrocarbon reserves remain largely undeveloped, but technological and climatic shifts could alter that calculus. As Arctic extraction becomes less cost-prohibitive, early positioning matters, and above all, military geography. Greenland occupies the GI-UK gap, the Greenland-Iceland-UK corridor, a critical choke point in North Atlantic security. It hosts Pichafik Space Base, formerly Thule Air Base, a keynote in missile warning and space surveillance. For decades, American presence there operated under agreements with Denmark. Trump wanted more than presence, he wanted ownership, permanence, control, and tethered from Danish approval. He miscalculated. Greenland is not an empty asset. It is a self-governing territory with home rule. It has its own parliament, its own leadership. A population deeply rooted in Inuit heritage. Political identity there is shaped by autonomy, not subordination. When rhetoric suggested force, it triggered alarm not only in Copenhagen, but in Nuuk. Denmark is a founding member of NATO. An attack on Danish territory implicates Article 5, threatening a NATO ally fractures alliance cohesion. European leaders heard the implication clearly. Within weeks, instead of acquiescence, coordination accelerated. Canada opened a consulate in Nuuk. That step had been planned earlier, but its symbolism shifted instantly. Canada was not threatening annexation, it was offering partnership. The Defense Memorandum formalizes cooperation that had existed informally. Intelligence sharing on Arctic maritime movements. Joint exercises in extreme cold environments. Personnel exchanges to deepen interoperability. Logistics agreements allowing reciprocal use of facilities. These are not gestures, they are operational frameworks. For decades, Arctic security was largely assumed to run through Washington. American power was the backbone. Canada and Denmark aligned under NATO umbrellas. Now, Arctic nations are strengthening direct ties independent of American pressure. This does not remove the United States from the Arctic, it reduces exclusivity. Greenland gains something crucial from this arrangement: options. Instead of being cornered between Denmark and Washington, it expands its network. It interacts directly with Canada on Arctic infrastructure, search and rescue capability, Coast Guard training, and surveillance systems. It deepens its agency. Trump treated Greenland as an acquisition target. Canada treated Greenland as a stakeholder. The contrast is stark. Geography binds Canada and Greenland through shared Arctic waters. Cultural ties bind Inuit communities across the Canadian Arctic and Greenland. These relationships do not depend on presidential rhetoric. They depend on trust. Trust becomes strategic capital. When threats dominate, trust evaporates. When cooperation expands, trust compounds. And the Arctic rewards long-term trust. The deeper consequence of this pact is not the ceremony in Munich, it is the architecture it begins to build. Joint Arctic surveillance means shared data on ship movements through the Northwest Passage and surrounding waters. As commercial traffic increases, so does the need for coordinated monitoring. Whoever controls the data shapes the narrative of security. Canada and Denmark have now institutionalized that sharing without rooting it exclusively through Washington. Mutual logistics support means Canadian forces can operate from Danish facilities in Greenland, and Danish units can rely on Canadian Arctic infrastructure, airstrips, deepwater ports, fuel depots, cold weather staging grounds. In the Arctic, logistics is power, distance is punishing. Infrastructure determines presence. Personnel exchanges and defense innovation cooperation embed long-term alignment. Officers train together, engineers co-develop Arctic-specific equipment. Procurement decisions begin to synchronize. Over time, interoperability becomes habit. Habit becomes alignment, and alignment becomes influence. For the United States, the strategic cost is subtle but profound. Influence that once flowed automatically through NATO command structures is now complemented by parallel Arctic channels where Washington is not the exclusive hub. Russia and China are watching closely. Russia has expanded military installations along its Arctic coastline. It fields the world's largest fleet of icebreakers. It treats the Northern Sea route as a sovereign corridor. China, self-described as a near-Arctic state, invests in research stations, shipping trials, and polar-capable vessels. The Arctic is no longer peripheral, it is contested. In that contest, alliances matter. Trump's rhetoric framed Greenland as something to be taken. European leaders heard something else: unpredictability. The Munich Security Conference became a forum not just for defense coordination, but for recalibrating transatlantic expectations. When Denmark's prime minister warned that force against Greenland would shatter NATO cohesion, it was not hyperbole. It was a signal that alliance credibility cannot survive internal threats. Canada read that moment carefully. Rather than escalate rhetoric, Ottawa accelerated structure. This is a pattern. Trade tensions lead to infrastructure diversification. Tariff threats lead to supply reallocation frameworks. Now annexation rhetoric leads to Arctic defense realignment. Each time pressure is applied, Canada builds alternatives. The Canada-Denmark Pact does not eject the United States from the Arctic. American forces remain at Pacific. NATO obligations persist, but exclusivity erodes. Greenland's increasing autonomy complicates future negotiations. If Greenland moves toward greater independence in coming years, defense arrangements will require renegotiation. Washington will not be dealing solely with Copenhagen. It will engage a government that remembers annexation threats and that has strengthened ties with Ottawa. Negotiating leverage shifts accordingly. Strategically, this pact signals a rebalancing of Arctic governance. Security coordination becomes more horizontal among Arctic nations, less vertically dependent on Washington. That is the quiet transformation. Trump wanted Greenland secured under American dominance. Instead, Greenland secured diversified partnerships. The irony is sharp. Threats intended to assert control accelerated decentralization. Efforts to demonstrate strength produced exclusion. Demands for ownership yielded collaborative networks that dilute unilateral influence. The Arctic will define future trade routes, energy corridors, and strategic positioning. ICE is retreating, investment is advancing. Military planning is intensifying. In that environment, perception matters as much as hardware. Allies measure reliability, partners evaluate tone. Small nations assess whether they are respected or instrumentalized. Greenland watched the rhetoric. Denmark calculated the risk. Canada offered cooperation. 1 month later, a new defense framework exists. Not loud, not theatrical, but real, Trump tried to stop what he saw as drift. Instead, he catalyzed alignment that bypassed him. The Arctic remains shared space, but its management is evolving. Canada and Denmark inside the emerging framework. The United States observing from the edge of a room it once dominated. That is not a symbolic loss, it is a structural one. And in geopolitics, structures outlast speeches.